November 17th in the year 1558, Queen Mary I, the monarch of England and Ireland since 1553, continues her eternity and is succeeded by her 25-year-old half-sister, Elizabeth. The two half-sisters, both daughters of King Henry VIII, had a stormy relationship during Mary's 5-year reign. Mary, who was brought up as a Catholic, enacted pro-Catholic legislation and made efforts to restore the Pope's supremacy in England. A Protestant rebellion ensued, and Queen Mary imprisoned Elizabeth, a Protestant, in the Tower of London on suspicion of complicity. After Mary's continuance of eternity, Elizabeth survived several Catholic plots against her, though her ascension was greeted with approval by most of England's lords, who were largely Protestant and hoped for greater religious tolerance under a Protestant queen. Under the early guidance of Secretary of State Sir William Cecil, Elizabeth repealed Mary's pro-Catholic legislation, established a permanent Protestant Church of England, and encouraged the Calvinist reformers in Scotland. In foreign affairs, Elizabeth practiced a policy of strengthening England's Protestant allies and dividing her foes. Elizabeth was opposed by the Pope, who refused to recognize her legitimacy, and by Spain, a Catholic nation that was at the height of its power. In 1588, English-Spanish rivalry led to an abortive Spanish invasion of England, in which the Spanish Armada, the greatest naval force in the world at the time, was destroyed by storms and a determined English navy. With increasing English domination at sea, Elizabeth encouraged voyages of discovery, such as Sir Francis Drake's circumnavigation of the world and Sir Walter Raleigh's expedition to the North American coast. The long reign of Elizabeth, who became known as the Virgin Queen for her reluctance to endanger her authority through marriage, coincided with the flowering of the English Renaissance, associated with such renowned authors as William Shakespeare. By her continuance of eternity in 1603, England had become a major world power in every aspect, and Queen Elizabeth I passed into history as one of England's greatest monarchs. It was November 17th in the year 1839 that Italian composer Giuseppe Verdi's first opera, Oberto Conte di San Bonifacio, debuts in Milan. The premiere was held at La Scala, Italy's most prestigious theater. Oberto was received favorably, and the next day the composer was commissioned by Bartolomeo Morelli, the impresario at La Scala, to write 3 more operas. In 1842, after some personal and professional setbacks, the opera Nabucco made Verdi an overnight celebrity. He would go on to compose such classic operas as Rigoletto, Il Trovatore, La Traviata, Aida, and Otello. Giuseppe Verdi was born in Lerancale in the former Duchy of Parma in 1813. His father was a tavern keeper and grocer, and Verdi demonstrated a natural gift for music early. He studied music in the neighboring town of Busseto, and at the age of 18 was sent to Milan by a sponsor to enter the Milan Conservatory. He was rejected for being overage, but stayed in Milan and studied under Vincenzo Lavina, a composer and former harpsichordist at La Scala. In 1834, Verdi returned to Busseto and became musical director of the Philharmonic Society. 5 years later, Verdi, at 26 years of age, saw his first opera debut at La Scala, the finest theater in Italy. Oberto was followed by Un Giorno di Reno, King for a Day, 1840, a comic opera that was a critical and commercial failure. Verdi, lamenting its poor reception and also the recent continuances of eternity of his wife and 2 children, decided to give up composing. A year later, however, the director of La Scala convinced him to write an opera based on the story of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II. Nabucco in 1842 was a sensational success, followed by Il Lombardi, The Lombards of 1843, and Ernani in 1844. Rigoletto in 1851 is considered his first masterpiece, and Il Trovatore, The Troubadour of 1853, and La Traviata, The Fallen Woman of 1853, brought him international fame and cemented his reputation as a major composer of opera. Verdi's melodic and dramatic style was further developed into Un ballo en maschera, a mass ball, 1859, and La Forza del Destino, The Power of Destiny, in 1862. Aida, in 1871, commissioned by the Khedive of Egypt and first performed in Cairo, is his most famous work. Late expressions of his genius are Othello, or Othello, of 1887, completed at age 73, and Falstaff, which premiered in 1893 when Verdi was 80. Falstaff was Verdi's last opera and is considered one of the greatest comic operas. Verdi continued his eternity in Milan in 1901. He was greatly honored in his lifetime and is credited with transforming Italian opera into true musical drama. It was November 17th in 1968 that the Oakland Raiders scored 2 touchdowns in 9 seconds to beat the New York Jets. And no one sees it because they're watching the movie Heidi instead. With just 65 seconds left to play, NBC switched off the game in favor of its previously scheduled program, a made-for-TV version of the children's story about a young girl and her grandfather in the Alps. Viewers were outraged, and they complained so vociferously that network execs learned a lesson they'll never forget. A quote from one person: "Whatever you do, you better not leave an NFL football game." The game between the Jets and the Raiders was already shaping up to be a classic. It featured 2 of the league's best teams and 10 future Hall of Fame players. By the game's last minute, the 2 teams had traded the lead 8 times. The game's intensity translated into an unusual number of penalties and timeouts, which meant that it was running a bit long. With a little more than a minute left to play, the Jets kicked a 26-yard field goal that gave them a 32-29 lead. After the New York kickoff, the Raiders returned the ball to their own 23-yard line. What happened after that will go down in football history. Raiders quarterback Daryle Lamonica threw a 20-yard pass to halfback Charlie Smith. A face mask penalty moved the ball to the Jets, 43. And on the next play, Lamonica passed again to Smith, who ran in all the way for a touchdown. The Raiders took the lead 32-36. Then the Jets fumbled the kickoff, and Oakland's Preston Riddlehuber, either one, managed to grab the ball and run it 2 yards for another touchdown. Oakland had scored twice in 9 seconds, and the game was over. They'd won 43-32. But nobody outside the Oakland Coliseum actually saw any of this because NBC went to commercial right after the Jets kickoff and never came back. Instead, they did what they'd been planning to do for weeks. At 7 p.m., they began to broadcast a brand new version of Heidi, a film they were sure would win them higher ratings during November sweeps. Before the game began, network execs had talked about what they'd do if the game ran over its scheduled time, and they decided to go ahead with the movie no matter what. So that's what NBC programmer Dick Klein did. "I waited and waited," he said later, "and I heard nothing. We came up to that magic hour and I thought, well, I haven't been given any counter order, so I've got to do what we agreed to do." NBC execs had actually changed their mind and were trying to get in touch with Klein to tell him to leave the game on until it was over, but all the telephone lines were busy. Thousands of people were calling the network to urge programmers to air Heidi as scheduled, and thousands more were calling to demand that the football game stay on the air. Football fans grew even more livid when NBC printed the results of the game at the bottom of the screen 20 minutes after the game ended. So many irate fans called NBC that the network's switchboard blew. Undeterred, people started calling the telephone company, the New York Times, and the NYPD, whose emergency lines they called for hours. Shortly after the Heidi debacle, the NFL inserted a clause into its TV contracts that guaranteed that all games would be broadcast completely in their home markets. For its part, NBC installed a new phone, the Heidi phone, in the control room that had its own exchange and switchboard. Such a disaster, the network assured its viewers, would never be allowed to happen again. The information documented and divulged on this audio file can be verified on history.com.